So today we are filing a lawsuit to fight what Stephen Miller calls federal immunity. The way that courts have interpreted the situation is that if a federal official gets into your house without a warrant, takes away your licensed firearm, beats you, or even kills you, or detains you for no reason, there's nothing you can do about that. You cannot sue them in state courts, you cannot sue them in federal courts. That's what Stephen Miller calls federal immunity, and it is wrong. And we're filing this lawsuit to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future and that there is no such thing as federal immunity. It is true that state and local officials get qualified immunity, and that's a very difficult barrier to overcome. But when it comes to federal officials, it is difficult to open the courthouse door and file a lawsuit in the first place. So that's what we are here to fight. Congress really can make it all go away really quickly. They can amend Section 1983 that includes state and local officials and put federal officials in there. And then it will be much easier to sue. Or states like California can pass their own laws allowing for that. But something definitely needs to happen, because unless you can enforce your constitutional rights, they're nothing but promises on paper. One last thing I will say is that this is not a partisan issue. Federal officials work for all kinds of agencies. ICE and CBP for sure, but also IRS, also ATF, also FBI, also Bureau of Land Management. So it is important that all federal officials are able to be sued, that they're not legally untouchable. And that's what this lawsuit is all about. That's why we're partnering with George to ensure that doesn't happen in the future.
We'll open things up for questions in a little bit. My name is Marie Miller, spelled Marie-Miller, and I am an attorney at the Institute for Justice. We represent George Redez, a U.S. citizen, an Army combat veteran, and a working parent. And we are here today because we have filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking accountability for something that should never happen in the United States. Federal officers jailed a U.S. citizen for 3 days and 3 nights without explanation or charges, and the whole time deprived him of a hearing with a judge, of access to an attorney, of all contact with the outside world, and did not allow him to bathe burning chemicals off of his skin for about 72 hours. This case is about George Redez, but it is also about a basic promise at the heart of our Constitution, that our government cannot snatch you off of the street, douse you in chemicals, lock you in a cell for 3 days without allowing you to bathe, without allowing you contact with your family, without access to an attorney, and without ever presenting you to a judge for a hearing. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what happened to George. Last year, on July 10th, George was driving to work in the afternoon. He was scheduled for a shift as a security guard at Glass House Farms in Camarillo, California. Unbeknownst to George, though, federal officers were conducting an immigration raid at the facility. When he encountered officers blocking the road to the farm, he calmly explained to them that he is a U.S. citizen, that he works there, and that he was just trying to report to his shift. He was not protesting. He kept his distance. He was not interfering with law enforcement. He was not posing a threat to anyone. And the officers, for their part, did not question his identity or his motives. They didn't accuse him of anything. They didn't suggest that he was threatening anyone. But they wouldn't let him pass. So he slowly backed up his car to leave, as some officers told him to do. But the officers wouldn't let him leave either. They deployed tear gas canisters around his car, engulfing it in fumes. Then an officer shattered his driver's side window. Another officer pepper sprayed him. and they dragged him out of his car and threw him on the ground. George did not resist. He could see that there was no point and would just make things worse, so he used the discipline that he learned in the military to put his hands behind his back. Still, one officer put a knee on his back, another one knelt on his neck, and they zip-tied his hands behind his back and made him sit in the dirt at the farm near the road. George thought he would be released within minutes once officers realized what they had done, but he was wrong. They kept him there for hours. He kept asking why he was being detained, and no one had any answers. And that was just the beginning. Then George was transported to a Navy base. There, he was fingerprinted, photographed, and had a DNA sample taken, and the zip ties were replaced with handcuffs and leg shackles. Again, George asked why he was being detained, why he was there, and the officers were asking each other the same thing. Why is this man here? Why was he detained? Nobody had any answers. George asked to call his family and to speak with an attorney. He was given no phone calls, nor was he allowed to wash the pepper spray and tear gas off of his skin. Next, George was transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center here in Los Angeles. He was strip searched, deprived of his belongings, and locked in a cell. No hearing with a judge, no access to an attorney, no phone calls, no ability to bathe the chemicals off of his skin. He was held for about 72 hours in these conditions. No one should be held in those kind of conditions. This case is about holding the government accountable for depriving people of basic civil liberties that are guaranteed by the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable seizures. The Fifth Amendment demands due process. Federal officers are not above the Constitution. It is the highest law of the land, and federal officers promise to support and defend it. U.S. citizens must be able to hold the government accountable when the government deprives them of these basic civil liberties. This case is not about politics. It is not about immigration enforcement. It is about something much more fundamental. U.S. citizens must be able to hold the federal government accountable for depriving them of basic civil liberties guaranteed in the Constitution. That's what this case is about. What happens to George could happen to another veteran, another U.S. citizen, another working parent. George is seeking accountability because what happened to him is unconstitutional and deeply unjust. And adding insult to injury, after George spoke out about his experience, the federal government tried to excuse the unlawful acts of its officers by concocting a story that George had assaulted some of the officers. Now, video footage of the initial seizure refutes that story, but even if it were true, that doesn't give the government license to lock up a person for 72 hours incommunicado with no hearing with a judge. That's what this case is about. I'll turn things over now to George to say a few words before we open things up for questions.
Guess I'll rotate. Oh my goodness. Oh.
Hey, George.
Hi. Oh. Oh my goodness. My name is George Redes. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in Ventura, California. I'm a United States citizen and a Iraq combat veteran, and a father of two. On July 10th, 2025, I was wrongfully detained and held incommunicado for 3 days and 3 nights. Today, I am formally announcing that I have filed a lawsuit against the United States government. This case is about accountability. It is about the Constitution, and it is about ensuring that no person in this country has their rights disregarded without cause. I served this country and swore an oath to defend the Constitution. I still believe in that oath. Seeking accountability through the courts is not an act of division. It is an act of faith in the system our nation was built on. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. I am pursuing this case not out of anger, but out of principle. So what happened to me does not happen to someone else. Thank you.
How do you feel today, George?
How do I feel today? I feel like things are just getting started, and still a long way to go.
In layman's terms, how are you doing an end around filing a lawsuit against the federal government when the rules protect them, that they're basically given immunity for what they were doing to George and the others?
Yes, I'm happy to take that question. Basically, we are allowed. Well, I still want George to be in front. We are allowed to file a lawsuit in the district court. But what generally happens in these types of cases is that the government immediately files a motion to dismiss without answering the complaint. And in the motion to dismiss, they claim federal immunity, saying that it doesn't matter whether what George is saying is true. As long as we have federal immunity, George should be kicked out of the court. So that's generally how these processes work. You come to court and you try to state your case, and the government files a motion to dismiss. Now then, Institute for Justice, we're a public interest organization. So what we generally do is we file appeals, and then we go through the appeal process, and after that we go to the United States Supreme Court and try to get the United States Supreme Court to say that people should be allowed to sue federal officials. But that's a long, drawn-out process, and hopefully after we're done with George's case, others won't have to go through this multi-year process themselves and will be able to get the government to answer the complaint.
Have you addressed how the FTCA applies to George's case?
Yes, the federal tort.
Oh.
George is filing his claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act, as well as directly for violation of the United States Constitution. So what the FTCA does, it allows suits against the federal government as the employer of those officers. And the problem with the FTCA is that just like with suits against individual officers, it is riddled with loopholes and immunities. So what the government often claims is that they are protected by the so-called discretionary function immunity. So essentially, as long as they were acting within their job description, that they cannot be sued. So even with the FTCA, we fully expect to have to fight those doctrines.
So you're ready for a long, drawn-out battle in court where it sounds like it'll be the United States Supreme Court that ultimately decides if he can take his case to court.
George, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm 100% ready. I mean, as far as I believe, this is one of the first cases that is gone through after the 6 months. So I mean, I guess it will set a precedent for everyone else's suit that's coming through, that will come through eventually. So I'm ready.
George, this seems like a very challenging process to get to even a starting point for a lawsuit. It's going to take a lot of energy, it's going to take a lot of time, but you seem very determined to move forward. Can you tell us why specifically at the end?
I guess I'm determined just for all this, I guess, because it's the right thing to do. I mean, I just don't understand how I would be able to sit here and just continue to let these things happen to not only myself, but other people. I mean, you don't just get to do all these things and not take accountability for your actions. And so I'm here for them to get accountability, for everyone to get accountability that's currently violating everyone's rights. And so even though this is going to take forever, and even though this is very tiring and I get DHS and people tweeting about me, saying bad stuff, I'm up for it. I'm up for a long game, and so I'm here for it.
And just to emphasize something, again, Congress can fix this tomorrow. There is a bill that was introduced for the third time in November of 2025 that puts federal officials on the same level as state and local officials. It's called the Bivens Act. If Congress passes that bill, then the road to accountability against federal officials is still going to be hard, just like it is hard against state and local officials. But at least it will provide an opportunity to George and others like him to state their claim in court and have a fighting chance against government officials. And if Congress doesn't do it, then what California is doing is something that's also important to mention. They're trying to pass a law that would allow suits against federal officials under the United States Constitution in state courts. This is something that is going to have to be approved by the United States Supreme Court, but we think it's something that the Supreme Court will agree with. So we encourage lawmakers, in addition to courts, to protect residents and citizens of this country by allowing accountability against federal officials.
Is this going to be the first case that goes through the whole process to be decided by the United States Supreme Court? Is this going to be setting a precedent, this case?
This case is going to be setting a precedent. There are cases, for example, the Justice Department sued Illinois for passing a statute that allows suits against federal officials. So courts are already engaging on these issues, but Georgia's case is certainly one of the first ones that opens up that discussion about what kind of accountability is due when federal officials violate your constitutional rights.
Right. Yep.
Thank you.